Hey, welcome. And Feliz Cinco de Mayo. Okay, if any of you forgot. My name's Jill McCoska. I'm one of the PIs of the U54. Glad to see you. Welcome everyone from UMass Boston, Dana-Farber Harvard Cancer Center. This is our spring symposium. It's titled Transforming Academia, Stories of Inclusion and Belonging. For the past 2 years, we have held a spring symposium focused on equity and inclusion in workforce development efforts. Okay. This year, our symposium will focus on themes related to the recruitment, retention, and advancement of faculty and others who contribute to creating a more inclusive and welcoming academic environment. Because of the inherent relationship between recruitment and retention strategies, we have asked our panelists to share stories of their experiences advancing equity, inclusion, and belonging within their research labs, departments, or institutions. The hope is that we will all be able to draw from the inspiring stories we hear to then continue our efforts to transform our own institutions, given the power we have with our various professional titles and affiliations, and our own personal identities, histories, and stories. We will hear first from our 4 panelists and then open the floor for a short Q&A to give our online participants a chance to engage with our panelists. Those are joining us in person, which is all of you, will have an opportunity to join panelists at the circle tables in the back to further discuss all of these efforts to transform our workplaces and institutions. And after that, we'll then reconvene to kind of share what happened during the breakout sessions, okay, with the whole group. Before introducing our panelists, I would like to thank the rest of the members of the working group that I sat on, who each spent many hours reflecting on and discussing these important ideas and topics and designing a meaningful yet engaging event. So thank you to Kati Zeleny. You can raise your hand there, okay. Valerie Stone, Jim Gould, Kerrie Wilkins-Yel, who's one of our panelists also, Paulo Gonzalo and Cabo, and Brianka Taylor, and Abby Shane. Okay, there's food in the back. I'm sure you may have noticed that by now. Please feel free at any time to go grab some refreshments. And if you have a phone or a laptop with you, if you could just mute the sound, okay, because we are recording and it'll just pick that stuff up. All right, so let's go in order. Actually, you're all kind of conveniently in kind of alphabetical order, I think. Okay, so we'll start first with Dr. Amarildo Barbosa, who's sitting in the first chair there. He is the Chief Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Officer at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Lilu served as Chief Diversity Officer at Lesley University, and prior to that, as Director of the Office of Multicultural Affairs and Student Inclusion. He has experience in the higher education and nonprofit sectors over the past decade, with interest in diversity, leadership, intercultural issues, and cultural assets within communities of the African diaspora. He holds certifications in restorative justice, social justice, conflict mediation, areas of bias response, and is licensed as an intercultural development inventory qualifying administrator. Liu holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Marketing and a Master of Education in Higher Education and Student Affairs Administration, both from the University of Vermont. He is currently a PhD candidate. I call him doctor because it's very soon, okay? Yeah. So in the Human Development and Leadership Program at Lesley University, where his research focuses on strategic diversity leadership, professional development, and organizational learning and capacity building. Welcome, and thank you. Next to Dr. Barbosa is Dr. Jenny Mack. She serves as the new faculty vice president for the Office for Faculty Development, Professionalism, and Inclusion at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. As faculty vice president for OFDPI, that is quite the acronym, she continues important work to support the growth of women and faculty members who are underrepresented in medicine within an inclusive environment, while building a structure that enhances opportunities for career advancement and supports the well-being of all DFCI faculty. Jennifer has previously served as the Associate Chief in the Division of Population Sciences at Dana-Farber and Director of the Program in Pediatric Oncology Population Sciences at Dana-Farber Boston Children's Hospital. She's an associate professor in pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and earned her medical degree from Harvard Medical School and completed her residency in pediatrics and her fellowship in pediatric hematology oncology, and pediatric palliative care at Boston Children's Hospital and Dana-Farber. She also holds a master's degree in public health from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Dr. Mack is an attending physician in the Jimmy Fund Clinic and at Boston Children's Hospital. Her research interests are in parent, physician, and patient-physician communication, healthcare equity, and palliative care. Okay. Next to Dr. Mack is Dr. Karl Reid. He was appointed Senior Vice Provost and Chief Inclusion Officer at Northeastern University on April 1st, 2021. He also holds the title of Professor of Practice in the Graduate School of Education in the College of Professional Studies. Prior to joining Northeastern, Dr. Reid served for 7 years as the Executive Director of the National Society of Black Engineers, marking his return to the organization that gave him his first major leadership experience 32 years earlier. A certified diversity professional, Dr. Reid has been a leading national advocate for diversity and inclusion and increasing college access, opportunity, and success for low-income and BIPOC youth. As director of the Engineering Plus Alliance, he leads an NSF-funded national effort to achieve transformative, systematic, and sustainable change in representation of engineering. He is the author of Working Smarter, Not Just Harder, 3 Sensible Strategies for Succeeding in College and Life. Dr. Reid is also a founding member of the 50K Coalition, a national effort to produce 50,000 diverse engineering graduates annually by 2025. I'm going to skip over a little bit of this. Okay. I know, we got a lot. So I will say he grew up in Bronx, New York, and in Roosevelt, New York, which is a mostly working class African-American community on Long Island. He then went to MIT, where he got a bachelor's and a master's degree in material science and engineering. After MIT, he worked in the computer industry for a dozen years. And I will not say any more about that, but he sits on many advisory boards and councils, and he's the recipient of an honorary doctorate in engineering from the Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. So, well, Dr. Mack, I forgot to welcome you, Dr. Reid, and thank you. And all the way at the end there is Dr. Kerrie Wilkins-Yel, who is also on the working committee for the symposium. She's an assistant professor of counseling psychology at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, as well as the executive director of radical investment in strategic solutions towards equity, or RISE, Consulting LLC. Her research broadly focuses on equity, justice, and access, both at work and in pursuit of work. Specifically, she takes an intersectional approach to understanding the influence of oppression and marginalization on the career development and mental health of women from minoritized racial ethnic backgrounds, particularly within science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM disciplines. In addition to her scholarship, Dr. Wilkins-Yel addresses race and gender-based inequities in STEM by developing culturally sustaining interventions through interdisciplinary research practice partnerships. She founded and co-directs the multi-institutional I Can Persist STEM initiative. She is also a NSF Early Career Awardee and the recipient of the Emerging Leader for Women in Psychology Award and the Early Career Award for Distinguished Scientific Contributions to Counseling Psychology. So welcome, thank you. A very distinguished group up here. We're looking forward to hearing from them. And let's start off here with Dr. Barbosa. I'm going to keep calling you doctor.
I need that. Hoping to defend soon. So. Thank you.
Yes.
All right. All right. Good afternoon. I was gonna say good morning. Good to see everybody. Thank you for the introductions. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Vish, thank you again for the invitation. Abby, Brianka, the outreach and communications leading up to today. So first time here in this facility, actually, so it's good to be here. So as we, I think, folks said earlier, in terms of retention, one of the things that, we talk about in our community is despite our best efforts with recruitment, if the culture is such that it doesn't support folks coming in, it can really undermine all of our best aspirations and commitments to EDIB, as we're saying at Harvard University, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so it's really important that we think about cultures. And so what I wanted to do was talk about us a little bit more, working on cultures of belonging at the unit level, where that comes from. And so I'll go ahead and get started. Just a little bit of background and history. And so I started at the Harvard Chan School, and I've said this to a couple folks just in the first few minutes of being here, in June of 2020. And that time period has really defined my experience at the Harvard Chan School. As we all know, there was a lot happening in the world in terms of the global pandemic. I also started there about 4 or 5 days after the murder of George Floyd. And so coming into the institution, those are the conversations that were really salient. And one of the things that I gathered at that time was the fact that this racial justice reckoning that was happening around the country, around the world, certainly in higher education, also created room for new conversations to emerge, or just to amplify existing conversations that hadn't had the platform when we talk about structural racism, et cetera. And I had colleagues from other parts of Harvard University who would say, people are listening with a different ear. We can say things we couldn't say before. You couldn't say white supremacy, even in the community of diversity professionals. If you said that, there was a response and a reaction to that. So to be able to name racism is really important. It's something that we talk about. If we can't name it, we can't talk about it, we can't address it. And so coming in, that really was a defining experience. And at that time, we talked about the 3 pandemics. We talked about COVID-19, this racial reckoning, but also the financial hardship that members of our community were navigating. And so if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when engaging with our students and people are trying to find internet access, people needed resources to support the educational experience, people feeling isolation. And so those are some things that are really salient at that time. Our staff also was depleted. We were down to 1 professional staff member and executive assistant. So kind of rebuilding and retooling that team was a priority. We led with a tactical plan as opposed to a strategic plan. It was like, what are the things we just need to do to even do work? Basic fundamental things, and also to respond to some of the urgent needs that we're hearing from students. And so part of what we did was hold these listening sessions and conversations in the community, engaging different stakeholder folks. We did some, we call it a DIB audit, exploratory conversations with departments. We looked at prior assessments, things going back several years. We had focus groups with folks who'd served on diversity committees prior to my arrival, just to gather insight, what was working, what wasn't working, what could be different, what were the opportunities, right? Because some of the issues of today were also things that were raised 10 years ago, so gathered all that insight to then start thinking about, so how do we respond to the different challenges and opportunities within the school? Actually, let's move us forward. And so since that time, I want to say we were able to make a couple hires in key places. So part of it was thinking about what are the challenges, what are the issues, eventually getting to a set of priorities, objectives, and what's the right personnel structure to help us do that work. And so this is a key part of our focus at that point in time was, can we have a mechanism in place that allows us to address some of these issues, and really being careful in terms of saying, what are the priorities? And also, can we allocate resources, personnel hours, dollars to a more narrowly defined set of priorities in a given year so we can be effective, as opposed to not having kind of a clear vision of what we want to do and just taking on whatever comes our way. And then we get stretched too thin. We compromise the quality of what we're trying to do. And that just fuels more feelings of folks feeling as though change is not something that's going to happen, less faith in the institution response, et cetera, et cetera. And so this, kind of these steps led us to what we're calling currently our departmental action planning model. This name might change and evolve. And actually, I want to say too, before we got to that place, there were conversations with other institutions that were doing similar work. I remember at the time I had conversation with a colleague at Brown University. I'm blanking on the name. I want to give her a shout out. I want to say it's Shantae Delano, who is now at Dartmouth. And so they had a similar structure. Floyd Chung at Smith College had a conversation and they have something similar too. And actually someone from one of our affiliated hospitals have a different name. They called it something more creative than this. I can't recall where it was. And so just trying to identify, okay, who's doing, and what are some of the learnings and insights of these approaches? And so out of those conversations, one of the things that's clear, and some of this is obvious, right? We want to address issues systemically at the institution level when we think about inclusion and belonging. What does it feel like to be in an institution, right? So we think about that, what's informing that? What are the variables that shape that either can create opportunities for folks to feel affirmed and supported, or that can take away from that. But at the same time, based on what we're seeing and hearing, we're also thinking about how can we respond to issues at the department level? And you see on the screen here, behaviors and practices within the unit, how one experiences culture, a sense of community and connection. And so just a couple points, in terms of behaviors and practices, as an example, although we have policies and expectations set for the institutions, at the institutional level, one of the things that we hear about is that individuals struggle to deploy or implement those policies in a way that's consistent across departments. So there's variance. This is one of the key points I'll touch on in the later slide. Things were different department to department. Think about academic departments, administrative areas. And people often talked about, school-wide event, they may have, students especially talked about this, I experienced it one way here. When they go into the department, things are a little bit different. The culture is different. How we engage is different. Even the language that we might use around particular issues is different. And so that was one of the things we recognized right away. How can we create an experience where, some of these practices and behaviors, there's consistency there in terms of what that looks like. But also departments may have issues that are more salient in one department versus another. So we had the folks who talked about a sense of community amongst faculty and staff, felt like an area of growth, whereas other departments said, we're excelling in this space. Or people would say, we're hearing a lot about issues of sexism in one department. Another department say, we're really struggling around gender identity. And so there were some differences there. So this is also tied to some of the emerging strategy with our colleagues centrally, because while this is happening for us at the school, the Harvard University also hired Sherry Charleston, University Diversity Officer, and they're starting to craft priorities. And one of the things they talked about is, can we engage at the university, school, and department level in a way that's coordinated in terms of how does the work that's happening at those three levels inform each other? What is the communication, information flow, et cetera? Just a couple other points, there are also unique challenges, that we found within departments. So through assessments and engagement, we found that departments were also dealing with, some unique issues. They're less so like, couple, three departments here, but really specific to one area. Some of the initiatives vary too. So there were issues that stemmed from maybe unique activities that were happening in one department relative to another. I'll just move us forward here. So some guiding principles. And this is tied to, some messaging we try to espouse repeatedly, which is how do we build capacity? How do we activate folks at different levels? And one of the things that I've always said is, myself as one individual, our office as one office, can't make progress alone. And so it's how do we activate a whole community of leaders, managers at different levels, and key stakeholders, really thinking about what is your sphere of influence? And part of that is, where do we need to build capacity in relationship to the goals that we've identified? And infusing that again into day-to-day behavior and work, how you make decisions, your interactions, supervision, kind of all the things that you could imagine would happen within the institution, within the organization. And so you see the points here about university, school, department, which we try to be really explicit about, even in some of our roadmap documents and other presentations that we've done along the way. And so this DAP model helps us operate, again, from a both and vantage point. A lot of folks along the way would say, well, we got to address it at the institutional level, right? Because we're thinking systemically and we need to do that. And so part of our messaging is how do we shift to a both and mindset too, thinking about what are things that we do at the institutional level, and then what are the opportunities for you within the department to take steps that complement that or to address unique opportunities specific to your community or things that are specific to your discipline or specific to initiatives at the department level. And then how do we stay in communication and conversation and do that in a coordinated fashion? And so this model, although not perfect, we've been evaluating it, capturing feedback, has been evolving as we partner with our departments to do it. But the goal was to have a system to allow us to partner in that kind of way. So if I had to bring it down to like the most simplest terms, that's what we were striving for, a system that allows us to have a meaningful partnership with departments. And so what we encountered, silos of EDIB work across the school, pockets of excellence. People were looking to address similar issues, but weren't communicating. Somebody would say, we want to do an assessment in our department, but somebody else next door has already done one. They've shared the bag, they've, identified pillars. These folks are just getting started, but there's a lack of awareness that work is happening. Uneven practices and experiences and cultures. Again, citing some of the examples I talked about. Some departments had strong cultures in some areas where another department may be weaker in that area. So there's a lot of variance there, but also a desire for activation on EDIB by stakeholders. So everybody we talked to say, I want to see our leaders really activated. If there were things that they saw happening at the schools, this is great. Maybe the department chair was really strong. Maybe in the lab at that level, their experience was different. Maybe there were some things opportunities in the most granular space. So how do we diffuse that experience throughout? One point here. So again, this piece around managers, leaders, and those with positional power is something that we've talked a lot about because there's an added responsibility. So you could be, chairing a search committee. Maybe you're the manager, you're a convener of folks. You have power to shape and craft an experience. And so we really wanted to kind of, again, both in saying to everybody, what are your opportunities to enact change? But as a leader, you have an added responsibility. And then what does that look like? We just finished a series of workshops with one department, something that we're introducing and piloting on these same things: capacity building within the department, cultures of inclusion, how we interact, how we make decisions, inclusive meetings, what does that look like? But moving away just from the kind of the high level, conceptual, abstract, but getting to what does the practice look like? Where do you need to build skills and how do we practice that? Let's come together and actually practice doing some of those things. And the other thing that we've named is it's not perfect either, right? The work is messy. We're going to make mistakes, but can we build a culture of trust where there's mutual understanding that, Vish, you might mess up, but I'm going to give you room to grow. I may make a mistake, but we've established a trust so that we can grow and come back from those experiences. And I'm citing Vish because I know Vish, and he's right there. But if we don't have that foundational trust, it's harder to have those conversations when things go awry. When someone makes mistakes, or to even give somebody the benefit of the doubt, or something that we say sometimes, how do you extend grace, if that foundation hasn't happened? And coming out of the pandemic, that piece around foundation, we said, foundational to inclusion is also the fact that there needs to be trust, relationships, but if people don't know each other, it's hard to establish that. And so that's something we're navigating. How do we do that in a space where some folks are hybrid, some in person? How do we build those connections and relationships? And even within our department, this is something we're trying to address. Because it's a different context. And so there are things that are popping up for us. Just a couple quick points on the model. So getting started, we created this ODI partnership guide. ODI is Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And it's intended to, again, identify key milestones and expectations. So just really defining what the partnership looks like between us and the departments. One of our new hires, Jennifer Castro, partners with me on this work. As we do it too, we've identified needs in terms of how do you facilitate this, and because there's a lot, it's a high touch type of process, a lot of questions, a lot of back and forth, a lot of engagement, meeting with folks at every step of the way, because it's really about building capacity, but also building confidence in the work, and recognizing when we ask departments to form committees, people are coming together with different ideas and assumptions about what that means. Different sense of priorities on issues that we want to address, different levels of experience, and also assumptions about who should lead the work. So last year we convened them in a summer training experience. We talked about this piece. What does it mean to be a staff person who's heading that committee versus a faculty member? And people talked about some of those, just kind of some of the feelings and things that they've encountered and experienced along the way. So part of it is how do we unpack that and get some shared understanding, break down some of those assumptions so we can move forward. The other thing we did was create a role. It's called the department liaison role. It's not an FTE, but it is a paid position for faculty and staff. And so they serve as that conduit between the department and us. We convene them as a group, we engage them individually, and they help facilitate some of the work with the departments. We actually met with this group yesterday, and it's a space to, I'll talk about, really surface, what are the issues that emerge and that actually issues school-wide is one of the things that we found. People asked a lot about how can we share information. And so it's really based on feedback to create a space where they can talk to each other, we can engage them. And one of the things we found is over time, they're engaging with each other more organically. So people now, in the beginning, it was really, we had to facilitate, put an email out, hey, I know folks are trying to do an assessment in metabolism. Has anybody done that? 2 years in, now people are doing that outreach on their own on a number of things. So the relationships within that group is evolving. We're also seeing some organic change there. This is just a snapshot of the cycle, which is also evolving with feedback, in terms of, the action plan submitted early in the year. We do check-ins mid-semester. There's a winter engagement. All the department liaisons come together, checking with individual departments. They submit a progress report, end of year. And so we've actually changed that from June to July based on feedback too. This entire process is being molded by the folks participating in. Some key steps in that cycle. You can see the EDIP Planning Institute was something that we held last year for the first time based on what we were observing and assessing about how we're working as a community. Because part of this is helping them implement, whether it's community building activities, creating learning and development opportunities within the department, doing assessments, identifying a mission and vision at the department level. Molecular metabolism has, they have some language on the web, creating their web content, all the basic things, because that's where we are at this point in time. So we're laying just some foundational things, talking about how do you create shared goals with leadership? Because one of the things we heard in our, and I've seen this at other institutions too, where diversity committees are doing some work that is detached and removed from what the leadership is thinking about. And so one of our conversations at the Summer Institute was, how do we do that? How do you partner with leadership to identify priorities, shape those together so you go into the year with a sense of, not only is this what we want to do, we have the resources to do it, we have the leeway to participate, those kind of things. So a lot of those issues emerging, and you can see kind of some of those points I touched on during the year. So we've established right now 9 liaisons. It's actually 8 right now. We need to fill a vacancy there. Web content, action plan, progress report submission process online. We created a progress report review committee with the Dean of Academic Affairs, members of our staff and others, just to review what the departments are submitting. Which that group will meet in July, gives them feedback. They go back into planning and submit action plan for the coming year. So it's really about cyclical work. Goals, implement, evaluate, feedback, plan again, identify goals, so that we're doing that work in an ongoing cyclical manner. The other thing, that last point on the bottom, which we heard a lot about from our folks in the departments, people on these committees and liaisons, was, again, opportunities to share information, share documents, communication. So that's informed how we communicate with them and with the school. But that's something that's going to be ongoing, just that feedback. What are we learning along the way? What's not working? What could be different? We were overzealous with some things in the first year, but we're trying to be really responsive to what we're hearing from folks, right? How do we work it into their workflow so it feels manageable? Because we want people to be successful and feel supported. And so responding to the feedback is always critical. And just some new insights, kind of, summarizing some key points. Again, being able to increase coordination and communication in a way that we didn't have an opportunity before. So really these issues of belonging, we're hearing a lot of themes there. And there are a lot of pieces to address in terms of, again, communication, shared leadership, inclusive meetings, programming, new initiatives people are thinking about, supporting them in terms of that ideation, learning from each other. We're more easily able to set expectations. So one of the things we're thinking about is, going into this year saying, okay, we want every department to focus on X, Y, Z. You can be looking at things that are specific to your area, but we want everybody to do this particular item. And so we've kind of been gradually moving into that space and being more explicit as we get more insights in terms of what do we really need to address. We're able to identify unexplored issues and opportunities too. So information is coming to us that helps us as an office that we also relay back to our university colleagues. So we have the Legacy of Slavery Initiative happening currently, so that the work we do with departments also feeds into school level activities and universities. So that information for literally is happening between those 3 stages, back and forth. We've implemented new guidance and practices. And then that last bullet should probably be like 10 fonts bigger, that there's much more work to do. So this, like, a lot is really just setting a mechanism to help us work. But that's not the work itself too. So there's just much more to do. And so one of the things that we've established is it's ongoing, it's cyclical. One of my colleagues said sometimes it's messy. It's not perfect, we learn. I think generally I take that approach that, we let the data drive steps that we take, and recognizing that those action items aren't perfect, but we can evaluate, learn, and grow and continue to refine those things moving forward. So I'll stop there.
so no questions now, okay, because we have to move on. But we will have time to talk. Thank you. And now Dr. Mack.
Hey, everyone. I want to thank Boyo and Vish for inviting me, and Brianka and Abby for helping me think about things. Thank you all. Well, let me just say, let me see how I move to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Thank you. The first thing I thought when they invited me to be on this panel is, why me? Because here I am on this panel of people who have really had this experience themselves around inclusion and belonging that I can't speak to, right? Because I'm the only person who's not a person of color. And so I had to think about that a little bit. I talked a little bit with everyone who was planning to think about that. And, how can I make a contribution to this conversation, right? And, as I reflected on that, I think maybe part of the message that they had is that this work belongs to all of us. And it's important for people of all backgrounds to find ways to engage in this in a way that's authentic and can, make our community better. So I'm happy to try to be a voice for that, and also to learn from this amazing panel and from this group. And so in preparing, Brianka in particular encouraged me to think about, this is a story, right? And then it's an evolving story. But I tried to think about some ways that I try to do things that can support inclusion. So maybe, we can generate new ideas or have some conversation about these things. So the first one is, kind of a fundamental thing, which is making sure that people feel valued and know that they matter. And so, as I thought about this one, and I think maybe this is the most important one, and so one of the things that came to mind is an experience I've had over the past couple of years. So early in the pandemic, I was asked to give a career path talk to a group of young people who were mostly soon out of college, and starting in their first jobs. And so I gave my little talk on Zoom, and afterwards, a couple of the attendees, it was all on Zoom. So they emailed me afterwards and they said, "Oh, can we have a follow-up talk?" And I said, "Sure," so I set up a Zoom with them, with the two of them. They were both first generation to go to college. They were both Black. They were both children of immigrants. And they came, it was a Zoom again, because this was like 2020. So they came with a list of questions for me. They had planned, they pre-gamed, they had a whole thing, and they went through all their questions with me, and they were just the loveliest young people. And so we did that, and then, we said goodbye. And then within 15 minutes, I had an email from each of them, now individually, saying, "Can we talk again?" And so, we met again individually. This was like over a few months, right? And then subsequently over a couple of years. And finally, I got the hint. So after the meeting, I would be like, "When do you want to go for coffee again?" And, they, I think, I just kind of went along for the ride, right? They were these lovely young people, and and I was just kind of trying to figure out what can I do for them, right? And there were little things I would do. We talked about, for one of them, test prep, because this was someone who had some challenges with test taking, right? And we talked about letters of recommendation and personal statements and doing interviews and these kinds of things that are sort of like practical things. But I think what they really needed is to have a space to talk about their place and to feel like they belonged, you know, in some way. And so, you know, I think the main thing that they needed to hear from me is there will be a place for you. And so that's what I tried to keep doing, is saying that the field will be better because you're in it. And, you know, as you go through these obstacles, which they did, you know, and still are, to just remember to have that vision, and that I see it too, right? When they have trouble seeing it, I see it too. And so that's the first thing that I think about is, you know, try to let people know that they're valued because of who they are, and especially in the academic world, that they have a legitimate place, they belong. Okay, so then the second thing that I think about is, you know, making sure that doors are open for people. And I know this seems kind of obvious, but I think the thing is that not everybody knows they can knock at doors. You know, and I experienced this too, you know, not coming from a really academic background, but then when I went into, you know, my education in these places, a lot of my peers understood you could go to a professor and say, I want to work with you. And that was just beyond my comprehension, that I could ask somebody to work with me and they would say yes, you know, and that's the way the world worked. And I think this is a real barrier for people who haven't been part of this kind of academic life or academic world, that it's hard to think about how those doors are going to open if they're currently closed. And so we started this program in the Population Sciences division that I'll tell you about. That's for medical students. But I want to mention this actually came in part out of some conversations that I had with Vish. So one of the nice things that Vish does for me, I pretend I'm doing it for him, is that he meets with me once a month, and with no agenda, we just check in about things. And one of our topics of conversation, probably a year and a half ago or so, was how to intentionally grow diversity in our field and in our division. And we had a recent faculty search at that time, you know, 18 months ago, and I was leading the search, and we had done what I thought were the right things to bring in a diverse field of candidates, and I just was not successful. And so, you know, part of our conversation was, okay, what are we going to do about that? Because I think it's very common in this situation to kind of throw up your hands and say like, oh, we just didn't get any candidates. You know, I hear that a lot when people talk about searches. And, you know, we thought, okay, we got to think about this and find a way to respond so that we can do better next time, or the next time, or 10 years from now, or whenever it is, right? And so around that time, I was sitting on a committee at HMS that gave out awards for groups that created a culture of excellence in mentoring. And I learned about a program at the BI led by Bobby Ye and Rishi Wadera. For anyone who knows them, they're cardiologists over there. And they have a program for medical students from underrepresented backgrounds to do research in cardiology. And so I reached out to them and I met with them and learned about their program, and we kind of developed a plan for what we could possibly do in population sciences. And I took the plan to our division chief, Ellie Van Allen, and, you know, to his credit, he looked at it and he said, yeah, let's do that. And he committed the money, you know, to do that. And so the way the program works is that we bring in one medical student a year from a background that's traditionally underrepresented in medicine by race or ethnicity, and also disadvantaged backgrounds. That medical student embeds with us for a year. They get paid a salary. They are matched with a mentor who does research with them for that year. They spend the summer at the School of Public Health. Maybe I should send my student to you to say hi. Doing the summer program in clinical effectiveness so that they kind of get, primed with some of the research skills, and then they continue with their mentor over the next year. And, the goal is to really have that long time period to embed themselves, to develop a research program, to have at least one publication. They get a career mentor as well as the research mentor, and they get a little stipend to go to a meeting and stuff. And we tried to be sort of intentional about a few things. And these were some conversations with Fish. One question was, well, what's the right time in one's career? Like what age or what level of person should we be targeting? Because we thought about faculty, we thought about, how can we bring in faculty? How can we bring in postdocs? And we ended up settling on students, and they wouldn't have had to been medical students, but to think about people who are early, to kind of broaden horizons early, help people see new possibilities and get introduced to the field. And of course, we don't know where our students will go, if they'll continue in the field, but we hope that some of them, as they get exposed, will want to do this. And then a second was to make sure the experience was robust, because there are a lot of summer programs, but I think it's really hard to get a full experience in a summer, and particularly productivity like papers. And then a third principle was to think about, what are the medical schools that don't have a well-worn path to Harvard, and so we reached out in particular to the HBCU medical schools and other schools where we felt that we could kind of expand the kinds of opportunities that people had. And that last point is one where I think that was more challenging than we thought. That we, in the end, for our first year, we mostly ended up with applicants from the kind of Ivy League type medical schools. And we have a terrific medical student who's starting, but I think that's a place where we need to keep working to build those bridges and build those connections, because, our initial outreach, I think I naively thought that people would just want to do it, but I think we have to have some track record, and we have to have some trust with the institutions where we're trying to build these partnerships. So that piece will probably take time, and maybe this group has ideas for, partnerships or ways to continue to build that. But like I say, we have a great student starting in July who will be nice for our program. And then, we'll continue this program, and hopefully eventually somebody will pay for it besides us. So that's the second thing I try to do is find ways to open doors and, specifically recognize that not everybody knows they can walk up and knock on a door and people will answer. And then the third thing I try to do is to actively work to support the work of other people who are doing good things. And so here I want to specifically mention two great people. Some of you know Ori Odijide, who's in population sciences here, and Paul Nguyen, who is in radiation oncology here. And they've created this amazing sponsorship program at Dana-Farber for early career faculty from backgrounds that are traditionally underrepresented in medicine. And what they've done is they have a small cohort of faculty. I think it was 8 the first year, 7 or 8. And they matched each of them with a senior leader at the institution who had some kind of connection to their field, who would meet with them regularly, help identify opportunities for them to grow and to take on new things. And so, these are things like asking the the young person to give a talk, you know, because the senior person's given plenty of talks. There was one person who was put forward for a leadership position, you know, these kinds of things. Just being very intentional about building those relationships and developing opportunities. And so they're just finishing their first year, and the program was so successful, it's entering its second year. I think it's just a wonderful example of how, you know, two people can think creatively and use their energy and dedication to expand opportunities and build community, which was another important outcome of the program, that the cohort of early career faculty have gotten to know each other as well. And then hopefully expand opportunities and promote advancement. So my role in this is just to talk about it, but I wanted to mention, you know, their work as an important thing that I think, you know, we can all appreciate. So that's really most of what I wanted to say, but these are the things that I try to do, and maybe we can add to my list today as I listen to other people, but, you know, make sure people know they matter, that they're valued, actively create open doors for people, and then support the good work that others are doing all along the way. So thank you.
Now, Dr. Reid. And I didn't mean to be so abrupt about the no questions. At the end of the session, we will have time for questions and discussion, okay? That will happen.
Okay, thank you. This is a phenomenal gathering, and I think this is worth a master class. I think you're all getting a master class. I'm getting a master class in this. And so whenever you had a substitute teacher, you know, you'd have a light day in school. So I'm the substitute teacher compared to those who are here. I think you'll see a lot of similarities throughout, and I'm the middle child, so my job was always to sort of bring everybody together. And so one of the things I do want to do is just highlight what not only what you heard, not to mansplain, but to highlight what you've heard, and then tie it to what I'm about to share with you. One was this, well, before I do that, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine recently produced a report, a consensus report on advancing anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion in STEM organizations, 2 M's, including medicine as well. It was released on February 14th on Valentine's Day. I happened to have the pleasure of serving on that committee, as is Joan Reid. Many of you know Joan Reid in this area as well. And one of the things it really talks about was the sort of the concentric circles of the history, as Lilu pointed out, Dr. Barbosa, future Dr. Barbosa pointed out, was this whole notion of we are really built in this kind of the historical, socio-historical, socio-political, environment, a context that really has its racist underpinnings. As a society, as a country, you think about our government, you think about our education, you think about our criminal justice system, you think about healthcare, just really it touches every aspect of our society, and we're seeing the results. And really, the report really talks about the history, but then talks about sort of the concentric circles. And individuals are located within within teams. Teams are located or led by gatekeepers, and gatekeepers are in organizations. And all of that is in that socio-historical context as well. So the report gives some very practical ideas as to what organizations can do to really advance not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really advance anti-racism. Because really that's the area where we start to dismantle some of the systems that really have been established as well. You'll hear me talk a little about listening sessions. You heard Dr. Barbosa talk about listening sessions, the power of listening sessions. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so what we've discovered is not only do the things the things that people need could be sort of articulated well in the listening session, but it really will kind of inform the strategy, and it should be a bottom-up strategy as well. The whole notion about that we just heard from Dr. Mack about making sure people know they matter, you'll see that that's really the thrust of our initiatives. It's talking about diversity. In my opinion, diversity is a means to an end. You want to advance diversity so that there are meaningful interactions with people who are different. When there are meaningful interactions, the research shows it mitigates the level of microaggressions and the toxicity of environments when you're interacting with people who are different. When you're doing that, you're creating much more inclusive environments where people feel that they can bring their whole self and thrive in that environment. But at the end of the day, that sense of belonging is what matters. And Dr. Barbosa talked about this, the Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and sort of there've been sort of poo-pooed about that because it wasn't peer reviewed and all of that. But the truth is, he observed hundreds and thousands of people and how they behave. And it turns out that there were these levels. And of course, there are different models, but it always comes back to belonging as the third level of need that we have. The first level is shelter and food, right? Actually, food and sort of the fundamental needs, then shelter, then the third level is belonging. We all have a desire to be a part of something as well. And so that's really what our effort is around Northeastern, is how do we prioritize belonging as well. Just say a quick word about what I call my path to purpose as well. I'm in this role for the last 2 years. I started out at MIT with a bachelor and master's degree, started out to be an engineer. I always wanted to be an engineer since I was 3 or 5. 5 when I wanted to be an engineer, 3 when I was told to say Massachusetts Institute of Technology by my father as well. And then I went to work in industry, went to work for IBM, and worked for Software AG, a German-based software company, led a worldwide data warehouse division as well. Having a name like Karl Reid, working with a German company, and the way I showed up and the reaction that people had once they saw me was kind of an interesting experience about code switching. And then I returned after 12 years and became the executive director of engineering outreach programs. So the very things that I started to do as an undergraduate in Cambridge and Boston and bringing kids to MIT, exposing them to engineering, came back after 12 years to do that as a living as well. And then I was promoted to an associate dean director of the Office of Minority Education. It's like ORMA here at Harvard Medical School, where actually coincidentally is head by my wife, Andrea. And so that's what I did at MIT for about 10 years. And then I moved to, in part-time, I got a doctorate in education from Harvard Graduate School of Education. I've done some work on the success factors of Black males in higher education. And it turns out, again, many of the same things that you saw here. It's the vertical and horizontal integration that causes people to be success. In other words, the quality of the interaction with faculty and management, supervisors, et cetera, and the quality of interaction with peers really leads to retention, leads to some people thriving. So again, Dr. Barbosa talked about, so it's not just enough to get people in the door, it's looking at sort of what are the environments and the conditions that are necessary for someone to be successful once they're there. It turns out, again, Vincent Tinto has done this work on students leaving college. It's called institutional integration, the quality of interaction with faculty or teachers or supervisors, and the quality of interaction with your peers. If you have those two dimensions, you're more likely to not only just stay wherever you are, but you're more likely to thrive as well. So a lot of our work has got to be around making sure that those settings, those conditions are met for everyone here, and that's belonging. Went to work for the United Negro College Fund, worked with HBCUs on programs and national programs, and then I went back home to my organization that actually got me started, the National Society of Black Engineers. And then now, as you mentioned, I'm thinking about sort of how do we take all these lessons over 30 plus years and really get it to scale. Get it to scale, not just at the institutional level, but really at the national level. So, the question that I was I suggested in responding to Abigail and Bianca were how can we institutionalize inclusion and belonging? Again, you'll see a lot of similarities with what we just heard. But how do we institutionalize? How do we embed it so that it's everyone's responsibility? My president, Joseph Ayoun, was brilliant in saying, Karl, I want you to be irrelevant. And the first time he said that, I said, what do you mean, sir? And he says, I want this to be such that regardless of whether you're here, that this becomes something that everyone owns. That you stop someone in the street and say, what are you doing to advance belonging? What are you doing to advance inclusion as well? And they can answer you. They feel a responsibility. So how do you do that? How do you make it a part of the ethos as well? We see it in other industries, right? Everyone's talking about something, right? Whether it's TikTok or the like. I mean, there's something that's done, that the tipping point that Malcolm Gladwell talks about. How do we ensure that there's a tipping point around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? That's the challenge. Northeastern is a phenomenal institution. It's an institution like no other, and we like to say that because it is. I will just say a quick word about this, that we are now 14 campuses in 3 countries. So when I talk about transforming an institution, I have to think about London and Vancouver and Toronto and Seattle and Charlotte as well. And everyone there has a different area of focus. Just much like you heard about your departments at the T.H. Chan, we actually, every campus has a focus. Vancouver, it's about First Nations. We don't call it Native American, right? We don't call it Indigenous. It's about First Nation. That's a major issue there with the history there in Canada. So being sensitive about sort of building that ground up need is important. To his credit, after George Floyd was murdered, our president sort of announced a major initiative to address the scourge of systemic racism. So again, we called it what it is, right? Naming it is so very key. And the National Academies report is the first report out of the National Academies that was established by Abraham Lincoln that names anti-racism as well. But also to advance our commitment. And there was 9 dimensions under this initiative. The first one I want to mention is increasing diversity and representation. It was a bold goal that by 2026, so in 5 years, a little about 5 years, that the incoming faculty, staff, and students would be representative of the nation and the society. It was a stake in the ground for the university that we were going to be there. And that's why I was so thrilled to be a part of this. So I believe in big goals, and it's necessary for this work to do. The second bullet is increase university-wide accountability. And so part of what we decided is that we needed to understand what the current state of affairs was around diversity, inclusion, around the climate and the culture. The culture, as we know, is around the values, the behaviors, the actions of individuals. It is this, what's a sociologist study. Climate is how we experience that, right? How do we experience that? And so what we've decided, all faculty, staff, and students in 2021 would participate in a climate survey. Ultimately, we discovered in the climate survey that there were 6 groups that had a different level of a sense of belonging at the university. Again, using data, right? I'm an engineer, so that was really thrilling to me to be able to use data and to build a strategy around the data. Transgender community, the LGBTQ community, conservative, politically conservative, had some different levels of sense of belonging. People of color, women on campus, as well as those who have temporary or permanent disabilities. So those 6 areas, we decided to have a series of listening sessions. Again, you'll hear this as well. And we discovered the listening sessions, they were very common themes that ultimately will become the 4 pillars of our work as well. And during our discussion, I'd be happy to kind of share some of that work. The other thing we did, very similar to the T.H. Chan, was, again, this whole notion of, Karl, I want you to be irrelevant. I started, when we rolled this out, I said to everyone, we're going to have a series of town halls and share the results of the climate survey. The president said, absolutely not. I want you to train 140 of the top leaders of the university to share the results in their units. And so we were able to disaggregate some of the results down to 20 different units and share that result. So we trained those as well, and they started to share the results and then host kind of psychologically safe conversations. And then we required every one of them to come up with a 3-year action plan. So in other words, what are you going to do to address the results of this climate survey and address the 2020 call to action by the president as well? And it's my office, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, that's gathered all these. We provided feedback to each of these plans, and we've kind of put them all in one dashboard and one availability so anyone else can see. And then we discovered that there were 7 major themes across those plans. And so those common plans were diversity around vendors, supplier diversity, staff, students, faculty, the need for data, the need for training, as well as creating and expanding the culture of inclusion and belonging. So that's great. We formed communities of practice where people who are involved in these plans across the university system come together on a monthly basis to talk about sort of the best practices, the strategies, and some of the challenges in those areas as well. Tearing down those silos, creating the Medici effect that's necessary. The last thing we did was, okay, how do we stimulate this ideas, new ideas? Ideas can't come from top down. Obviously, as we know, as my former dean at MIT used to say, as soon as they become deans, he starts to lose brain cells, right? So the ideas really come from the ground as well. So we launched an Inclusive Impact Innovation Fund, not a lot of money, about $150,000 in year 1. And we announced this across the university and said, we're going to fund your creative ideas around belonging for the campus as well. 60 applications came in, $2.2 million in requests came in. And there was a more important than just what we awarded and who we're valuing, we're going to be showcasing them in the fall, was the buzz around the university. That you are really empowering us to think creatively here as well. So the other thing I'll just say around this whole notion of making myself feel irrelevant and people taking ownership is to create these kinds of catalysts. Chemists understand this, right? Moving from one state to the other, you need a catalyst to really have the activation energy. And it wasn't a lot of money, but certainly it was the activation energy as well. The last thing I'll say is we have incorporated diversity, equity, inclusion into our strategic plan. So that's also very, very important. It can't be a separate pillar, can't be the 6th pillar or the 5th pillar or the 5th wheel or whatever. It has to be embedded in everything that we do. And so we're creating a global university. This is our 2030 plan, personalized experiential learning, high impact research, but look at all the way around. Diversity, equity, inclusion is infused in everything that we do. So thank you so very much. I look forward to having a further conversation, and I'll turn it over to my colleague.
Wilkins-Yel.
There we go. All right, so folks, I think we're ready to go into the small group right. I think we're done. We're done. We're totally done. So y'all, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Adan, thank you. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Brianka. Where is Abby? She stepped off for a break. Oh, there you are. Thank you so much. Folks, I have I feel really honored to be here, to be alongside my esteemed colleagues, to be in your presence and to sit in conversation and be in community with you as we interrogate, right, the ways in which we can ensure that inclusion, belonging, and retention gets fostered in the workplace. And so you'll hear me talk a bit about retention culture, and it's very consistent with what you've heard. And I hope as researchers and as individuals, we're starting to hear the theme, right? After a while, this has to be something we need to take up, right? There has to be something in this that it's consistently being represented throughout all of the talks. It's about time, right? It's about time that we take this up and then run with it because it's consistent. So what I'll do is, I think we are very well familiar with the idea that retention has been this emphasis for many of the workplaces, many of the academic spaces, many of the organizational settings that we've been in. And we've invested a tremendous amount of money, of time and energy into, ensuring that the workforce has more Black and Brown individuals in it. Folks, by Black and Brown, when I say that, I mean individuals who identify as Black across the African diaspora, individuals who identify as Native American, Indigenous, or First Nations, individuals who identify as Asian, as well as Pacific Islander and Latina, right? So these are the folks that I'm talking about when I say Black and Brown. I think it's important to name individuals that we're on the same page as we're having the conversation. But we've invested a tremendous amount of time, energy, money in ensuring that we have a more diverse workforce. Now, what I've realized is that we're falling short in ensuring that there's a retention culture, right? We're falling short in ensuring that folks can, well, let me ask this question. When we say retention culture, what are folks thinking that we're talking about? And I'm a professor, and this is what I do in my classrooms. So when you hear that, what do you hear? Keeping, supporting, yes, yes. Other folks? Wanting to stay. What else?
The experience is such that they want to stay as opposed to feeling like, why did I come here in the first place?
Exactly, exactly. So the consistent thing is that folks want to stay. And I want to piggyback up on that, and I want to break it apart, right? So there's a sense of, I want to be in a place as a Black employee, as a Black woman, I want to be in a place where I feel seen versus invisible, versus hypervisible, right? I want to be in a place where I feel heard, right? Where I'm not silenced, right? I want to be in a place where I feel supported, not marginalized, right? Not stigmatized. I want to be in a place where I can rely on the individuals in my community to allow me to feel supported. What does this boil down to? The psychologist in me tells me that this boils down to feeling like I can thrive, that I can flourish. You've heard these terminologies already from my colleagues, but how are we, each of us, taking responsibility and saying, wait a minute, how am I contributing to the people around me thriving, the people around me flourishing? That's when we break it down and we're using retention, and I want you to know, what does that mean? What does that look like, right? So we want to break it apart and ensure that we know the tangible components of what it entails. I want folks to thrive. I want folks to flourish. I want Black and Brown employees to feel as though when they come into our spaces, they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel supported, right? And what we've realized is that hasn't been happening. And as a result, folks have oftentimes left, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk about my own experience, and through my experience, I'm gonna offer some lessons, right? That then could be potential takeaways that each of you could have as you're leaving this room and you're percolating on what were the things that they talked about again. So the first thing as a lesson that I'd love for us to kind of sit with and grapple with is this death by 1,000 cuts, the cumulative effect of missed moments of opportunities. So oftentimes we talk about, well, it's this egregious thing that happened in the workplace and that's the reason that I left. Yeah, that often happens. But sometimes the reason that folks are leaving, more often than not, is for these small moments that have accumulated over time that has resulted in this feeling of, I am worn down, I am tired, and I have to protect myself. I have to leave an environment that is no longer serving me, okay? And so we tend to forget the moments where we can interject support. And we focus on this egregious act that needed to probably get into litigation. And no, there are moments, there are small moments. And so I'm going to tell you some of the moments that I've experienced in the workplace that were opportunities that I call missed moments of support, where I needed the folks in my environment to show up for me and support me, okay? Not egregious acts, right? I want to make that very explicit because these were the things that led to the cumulative effect of me deciding to leave my institution, okay? So what were some of these missed moments? Early in my career, I realized that I was in this environment that some way, somehow, implicitly or explicitly had tasked me with mentoring and really focusing in on the socio-emotional needs of BIPOC mentees. Now, granted, I am the proud product of Black and Brown women, especially, who have poured into me and got me to where I am. So granted, I am a full believer. Mentoring is at the core of what I do. What I noticed, though, when I was working with this faculty, that there was this expectation that I was the individual who then would be doing all the mentoring for the vast number of the students we brought into the program. And as concerned, but I brought in one student. When I look at my portfolio, I have 40 students. Faculty in the room, there's a mismatch in that number, right? There has to be a mismatch as an early faculty member, 40 students on my, whoa, you know, and feeling very new. This is, I'm treading cautiously, I want to know the space and all of those things. So up to this point, my department chair had been very supportive, incredible woman. And she had cultivated a space where I felt like I could go to her and say, something's up. So I went to her and grateful, so grateful for her space. And she's like, Kerrie, I'm noticing it as well. I'm noticing that there's a line at your door. When are you writing? When are you engaged in the research process? That's the currency that's necessary for you to thrive in tenure track. And I said, I gotta be honest with you, I'm really worried. And the students that are coming, I want to pour into them. I do, I truly do. But my ask is, can my colleagues share the load with me? Hear the question. Can my colleagues share the load with me? I needed them to link arms with me to ensure that their commitment to supporting Black and Brown students was uplifted. And in that moment, I wasn't feeling like I was getting that shared load experience. So my department chair, she made a statement. She said, when I give this feedback, not if, when I give this feedback to my colleagues, to our colleagues, how do you want me to share it? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, do you want me to share your experience and that it's coming from you specifically? And I said, oh, no. Oh, no. I appreciate you asking. Thank you. Folks, I'm emphasizing certain things because I want you to take away the tangible things of those moments. So if you hear me emphasize something, it's because I want you to incorporate this and probably implement it into your own spaces. So she asked me that question and I was appreciative because had she not asked and then went ahead and did it, I would have not felt very supported. We went into the faculty meeting, department-wide meeting, and she initiated the conversation, really nicely done. And folks, it's as though my entire body left. I was a person on the wall looking at the conversation play out in the room. And the conversation was one of, well, whoever feels overwhelmed needs to start saying no more often. Whoever, if these students are going to faculty, we need to tell them to go to other faculty members. And I sat there and I was like, wait a minute. I thought I had chosen to come to a place where we were linking arms to ensure that we're supporting Black and Brown students into our program. And I, in that moment, missed moment of support, needed to hear, wow, I'm realizing if you're saying that the students are needing more support, what can I do to offer that support? How can I show up in that space? Department chair tried the best she could, but the end result was the situation continued, right? Because the resounding response was the students needed to find alternative ways to get support, and whoever is feeling inundated just needs to say no more often. And I went back to her and I said, how can we reconcile the mismatch between our values for supporting Black and Brown students and faculty, as well as the actions that weren't in line with those values? White woman really grappled with me, really wanted to ensure that it was happening in the reconciliation of those two. And I can tell you with full certainty that I was tired, I was depleted, and I needed to feel like folks were linking arms with me. Now, was that the reason? No. But what it did was there were moments of support that needed to have happened throughout my time in a particular space for me to feel like, yes, this is the place where I belong. This is the place where they're committed to what they're doing, that they say on their website is reflected in what their actions are. So these missed moments of support is what I'm talking about. When we think about the egregious acts, then folks feel, yes, that's where we need to intervene. But where intervention is necessary is in these moments, the moments of engagements where individuals say, I had a negative interaction and I need support in this moment. Love my department chair that she was willing to go into that space and work on my behalf, and needed that support in a different way from my colleagues, right? Another area that was a moment where, in my bio, you all heard that I created the I Can Persist STEM initiative. Consistently, I was told, hold off, get tenure, hold off, don't do that just yet. And as a Black woman with an immigrant background, I'm Jamaican, and my ability to pour into my community is so central to what I do. So my interpretation of that was, stop all that you're doing and focus solely on the research. If I had done that, I would have been really, really tired, really deciding, is this career path for me? So when we offer these suggestions around what this picture looks like of how someone can thrive in a particular space, put ourselves in that person's lens. What are you passionate about? What are you needing to thrive? How can you get to the end goal whole so that you're thriving and flourishing, versus subscribing a belief that this is the one way that it can look and the only way to get to this path? I'm 5 levels in, the 6th level remaining to get my tenure. And I cannot tell you how much I feel like, had I done it any other way, I wouldn't be here. I would have opted for an entirely different career, because I chose to say, I have to do this with the passion, the thing that fuels me, the thing that grounds me. And I needed people in my community, missed moment. I needed people to say, do exactly what you're passionate about. Do the thing that you're invested in doing. I needed that, right? I got it eventually, I did. But it took too long to get to the place where that was the message. So I'm coming back to folks, if we were wanting retention, right? I love the issues, I love the ways in which my colleagues named the systemic, multi-leveled approaches that are necessary. Each of you in this room hold power. You hold power to capture those moments of support where you can reach out to a colleague and ensure that they feel seen, heard, and supported, okay? So I want you to feel agentic in being able to do that, right? Because it's in your capacity. Now, what's the next thing? So you heard me say, I felt tired, right? There was this, as a psychologist, I'm very attuned to one's well-being, socio-emotional ways of being. And what ended up happening is I started noticing that I was tired. I went to the doctor and they were just kind of like, are you stressed? And I was like, yeah. The manifestation of working in spaces that are harmful to us results in our bodies feeling depleted and tired and worn down. And so when we ask ourselves, we're about this retention culture, aren't we? If we are, then groups of our colleagues shouldn't be navigating the added toll of being depleted and tired while others get to go to work and work, right? So it's as though there are individuals who are doing double work, 2 jobs, because I'm having to withstand the what's coming at me, the encounters and the lack of support, while also doing the very thing I'm paid to do. If we're about retention culture, folks, we have to recognize that we cannot be asking a group of our colleagues to be carrying this extra work, right? Because what ends up happening is we're depleted and we're tired. And retention conversations rarely have mental health included in them. So if we want to take something away today, I want us to recenter. How are we talking about fatigue? How are we talking about psychological toll when we're infusing retention into our work? When I feel a sense of belonging, oh, that's like a weight off my shoulders. I feel good. I want to be in this space. But if I'm not feeling that sense of belonging or inclusion, oh, I feel like I'm dragging my bones to work, right? I don't feel like I want to be in this space. So we need to recenter mental health into conversations around retention and inclusion, because up to this point, we haven't brought those 2 together. So I decided that to protect my well-being, an act of self-preservation, an act of self-protection, I needed to find a space that was supportive. And that I did. But when we're holding positions of power in an organization, we have to now think about the both and the moments of missed support and the toll that it's taking on an individual's well-being, because they're going to leave if they don't feel like they're in a space that's supporting them. Because they have to ask the question, at what psychological cost am I choosing to stay in this space? What's the psychological cost of continuing in a space that might not serve me? That's a question that if we're about retention, folks, we have to be thinking about this. We have to ensure that we are focusing in on the well-being of the individuals in our space. Lastly, we often think, it's expensive to hone in on bias training and bias education and the workshops, when in fact, we have this revolving door. When folks come in, we recruit, we focus on recruitment, but if they leave, we now have to invest more money to get the next hire, the startup packages, if there's a individual who is navigating differential citizenship statuses, we're paying for the immigration component as well. So it's expensive for us to not invest in the retention culture. It costs us more money. So from a business standpoint, it makes sense for us to invest in retention, just as, or if not more than we do with recruitment. Because if we want to ensure that from a business standpoint, it's making sense, we would invest in retention. We would ensure that the people who are in our spaces don't want to leave. Now, what does this look like? It might mean I don't have children right now, but might there be a time when I'm a part of an organization where I'm curious about what type of parenting policies that they currently have? Now, if the parental policies are, minuscule, then how is that catering to the robust group of individuals that are available? But if we invest in robust parental leave policies, where whether I foster a child, I adopt a child, whether men want to take parental leave policies, that level of robust support is available, you have invested in people staying for years because they're a part of an organization where they feel like their humanity is being seen. Their flourishing and their ability to thrive as workers is being emphasized. That's the type of thing. The long term, the long cost of this is far more limited than if we had done, we just want to get folks in the door and that's it. So we have to invest in the long haul, folks. And in doing that requires us thinking strategically about, we have to keep the people who we have here with us. So these are the things, folks, that I want us to be thinking about when taking up this call to action, right? We are intervening at the moments, we're intervening at those missed moments and ensuring that they're no longer missed moments of support, right? We are now ensuring that we're alleviating or at least stymieing the psychological toll that is taken up when negative encounters are marred with missed moments of support. And we're centering on the fact that all employees will benefit, right? Too often we think, well, inclusion and belonging will only support those folks who hold minoritized identities. We all benefit when we support individuals who hold minoritized identities, right? We benefit when we have robust packages. That's the call to action that I want folks to take up when we leave today. How are we using our platform or sphere of influence to ensure that these things are happening? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful panel, wonderful discussions. Thank you. So, we need the Q&A. We will now go to our online people and see if they have questions. We'll take a couple of those before we go to the breakout. There's no questions? Oh. All right. Well, so there are no online questions.
Tiffany had a question.
What?
Tiffany raised her hand.
Oh, there is now. Okay.
Tiffany, can you type your question in the Q&A box, please?
In the chat.
I'm typing. Did you want me to speak instead?
Speak, yes, we unmuted you. Go ahead and speak, please.
Okay, all right. Thank you all on the panel. Really, really amazing. I have a question and anyone can respond. I'm wondering, like, what are your thoughts about the, to the last speaker's point, checking the boxes and not being concerned about the long game? What are your thoughts about the diversity for diversity's sake, but not implementing changes around more diverse practices around what we evaluate, how we define service, how we define scholarship? I'm just curious about any thoughts that anyone on the panel might have about that, and thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One of the things that I was, when I was sort of preparing for my talk, I had the phrase, a systems problem requires a system solution. Some of us in the United States, we have this little restaurant called Chuck E. Cheese, and they had this little game called Whack-A-Mole. And a lot of us approach our diversity with whack-a-mole, which these little moles come up and you whack one down and, something flares up as well. And as you mentioned, we get tired. I think the organization gets tired as well. So you really have to approach it in all aspects. And I think I use the acronym IDEA. So inclusion, which is the culture, diversity, which is representation, equity, which is just really making sure that the policies and practices are serving everyone appropriately. So tenure, promotion, hiring, et cetera, just looking at the data as well. The A, I like to say, is accountability and building in accountability. I was just at a lab review on their DEI plan, and they're building it into their performance reviews. So there are elements of, DEI, they call it DEIB, in their everybody's performance review, what that looks like as well, so that they're not charged for the minority tax, which is, you do this work and you're not being compensated for it or recognized as well. And the last is, even though it's IDEA, the E is squared, it's the ecosystem. It's looking at the whole environment, the community, the suppliers, all the other pieces as well. The way I like to kind of make the case for it is that and now McKinsey has done that. They have actually found that organizations that are more inclusive, more diverse at their senior level have higher earnings, or on average, right? Higher earnings, have better market share, more better retention to your point as well. And so the things that matter to them, framing the argument in that way really helps to make the case. Now, people of color and those who are minoritized groups hate that argument. There's this a hate argument because you're making an instrumental argument on my lived experience. But you really have to kind of address all audiences in this work and not just those who are marginalized. So that's my thought as well.
Oh. No, I think, Karl, I think you said it all. One of the things I think about, and we've talked about this in the context of faculty development, and I think we'd all agree that diversity alone is not enough. And so, there is a lot of research that says, right, more diverse
communities. In terms of outcomes, you see more creativity, better problem solving, more innovation. And the only thing I'll say is that you have to have these inclusive cultures in place to really harness that diversity. An environment that, that values unique perspectives, that can really tap into the different funds of knowledge that people have that also tied to what makes them who they are. And so without that, you don't see those outcomes. And so I think when we think about, departments and groups, committees, et cetera, we have to have those practices in place. And I think there are tangible things that can be done, relative to the missed moments that our colleague talked about. There are steps you can take to minimize those missed moments so that we can really harness that diversity.
I see. I heard the question. I've been sitting with it because I'm thinking about when we have spaces that, well, let me step back. Too often there's been the perception, and it's not a perception, it's a fact that many higher ed spaces weren't built for Black and brown folks. We're resting on that premise. So let's start from that place. And if we come from that premise, then the metrics that we're evaluating individual success are metrics that are oftentimes out of alignment with how we then see our work. And so, to Dr. Donaldson's question, when I think about the messages that I've received being in a process of tenure track has been a conforming to a structure that oftentimes is void of what the things that I find passionate and meaningful. And so I value my colleagues' comments because they are talking about the ways in which leadership needs to take this up and interrogate and implement structures that actually serve the entire group, right? And so when Dr. Donaldson talked about like service, disproportionately, Black and brown women are carrying an inordinate amount of service in many of our organizations. How is that reflected when you think about going up for tenure or going up for promotion, right? And I think that cuts across my BIPOC colleagues generally. We're carrying a disproportionate amount of service, but there's a mismatch then with what we are evaluated on. And so it requires this full systemic address, like we're addressing all levels, because it needs to be in the review, the tenure and promotion review. It needs to be in all facets. How are we ensuring that the factors that we're evaluating individuals on are in alignment with the groups we want to have in our community? So if we want community engagement, how are we ensuring that community engaged scholarship is rewarded? Right? So those are the things. So Dr. Donaldson, I appreciate your comment and I appreciate your question, because I've been sitting here and I'm thinking, it requires an adoption of a model that up to this point, I think Black and brown faculty have struggled with, right? How do we see ourselves in the metrics that we're being evaluated on?
Thank you. Thank you. Right now, let me explain how the breakout sessions will work, and then we'll take a break ourselves before we commence with that. There are 4 tables, one for each of our panelists. The first one by the windows is where Dr. Barbosa will be. Then the next one, table 2, is Dr. Mack. The third one is Dr. Reid. And the fourth one will be Dr. Wilkins-Yel. Okay, so you know where to situate yourself. We will take a 5-minute break. So we'll be back, let's say at 2:50. Okay, and then we'll commence. All right. And thank you everyone on Zoom. Thank you so much for attending. And we will see you later. Okay, thank you. All right. Please take some refreshments.